Jason, in the November-December 2010 Ohio Lawyer magazine, you wrote an article about law school graduation employment figures. And basically in that you talked about how that data is very misleading and that it is including all kinds of employment figures and maybe not just related to the legal field.
Right.
Any changes since the time that you wrote that article to the new one that will be coming up in the September-October issue?
To date and through the new issue in September-October, there have been no changes. However, this past June, the ABA did, the committee that's in charge of that information on behalf of the ABA did enact some new rules which should kick in for next year. Those rules would require what many have been calling for years, which is much greater disclosure and more detailed disclosure in terms of actual employment outcomes. There'll be breakdowns, as I understand it, of full-time, part-time, temporary. So we're hopeful that that there'll be thorough and clear reporting once those new requirements come out.
So what are the National Association of Law placements figures for the 2010 law school graduates?
Well, their overall rate, which includes everything from manual labor to being a Supreme Court clerk, I think was in the 80s or in the upper 80s, which itself is a drop from previous years. That overall rate, I think many of us view as misleading and not particularly helpful to law students and to those applicants who are thinking of going to law school. The more significant ones, I think, for legal employers and for law students, and most importantly for prospective law students or people thinking about applying to law school, deals with the employment rate, I think, in full-time JD required work. Nationally, that was 64%, and there's a chart in the article that sets that out. That itself was a dramatic reduction from years gone by. Regrettably, that same number, JD required full-time employment, all of the Ohio law schools fell below. I should correct that. I think all except one fell below that number.
A little different in this upcoming article than the one previous. You did a public records request.
Correct.
Of the 5 public law schools in
Right.
the state of Ohio.
What jumped out at me and was the percentage of private practice. Nationally, the percentage of students going into private practice was 50.9%. All of the Ohio law schools had lower employment rate than that for placement in private practice. There was also some data that showed that the percentage of students going straight from law school into solo practice was very high. That has traditionally been considered a weakness in the employment market as an indicator of students' inability to find law firm jobs. All of the schools, I think except one, were significantly higher than the national average for solo law practice, which itself had jumped up significantly since 2009. A number that I compiled that the National Association doesn't keep is the gap between the overall rate and the full-time JD required rate. That was significant because many law schools tout the overall rate, which historically has been well into the 90% percentile. The gap between that and the full-time JD required rate ran for majority of the law schools in the 30% plus range, and for some of them in the upper 20 range. So that, I think, is the gap that a lot of people have been very critical of in terms of the misleading or less than forthright nature of the numbers that have been reported.
What kind of reaction did you receive when you first put this kind of information out almost a year ago? Interesting. I've written a couple of pieces, and for the most part, I have gotten very, very positive reaction, emails and other communications from members of the practicing bar. Very little from the legal academic community, except the last article or piece I wrote. I got a couple of, which was somewhat critical, some would say very critical, of law schools and law faculties.
I got a couple of quiet emails from law faculty that said, we agree. Basically, you're not wrong.
Why do you feel it's important to bring this information to the forefront, to let people know about this?
There have been a couple of things that really brought this to light for me. And in particular, I think of, I've been an adjunct since '98, and I think of a number of the students who I've had who I have encountered after their graduation and such, and they're struggling, and it's been very difficult for them. And some of them might have made different choices. There's obviously a robust discussion that goes on as to, well, these are grown people and they make their choices and the like, and that's certainly true. But I view the job of law faculty and of lawyers in general is to, as best we can, try to get the truth out, particularly on things where the information can be well known. The numbers are the numbers, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to get that into the public in a user-friendly manner, so that those who are thinking of investing $150,000 or more in a legal education have good data on which to base their decisions.